Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name's Charlie from the Data Protection World Forum, and the topic for today's webinar is building safer pathways for cloud migration and storage. If you do have any questions, then please submit them using the Q&A tab, which you can find on the left-hand side of your screen, and our presenters will aim to answer these throughout and at the end of the presentation. This webinar is also being recorded and will be made available on demand. Joining us on today's webinar, we have Ali Kazmi, the Senior Solutions Engineer at PKWARE, and Dr. Alexis Pedro-Weeks, Associate Research Fellow at America's Institute for Cybersecurity Leadership. So welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for joining us today. I would now like to hand this over to Ali to start us off with today's webinar.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Thanks a lot for that introduction. And hello, everyone. Happy to be on the call, and we're very excited to have Dr. Alexis with us to discuss this topic today about challenges of cloud migration, and what are the different aspects from the perspective of security, privacy, what are the implications, what are different regulations, and so on. And then we'll probably share with you some of the the ways that you can address these requirements, and then take you through some of the use cases that we have seen in our experience with these sort of cloud migration projects. So if you could just move to the next slide, please. Thank you for that. So just starting it off over here, we'll talk about a couple of challenges that we have seen with a lot of our customers that they face while they're trying to move data to the cloud. Now, it's an exciting stuff. It's exciting technology. There's a lot of really useful tools there that can help you do that. But also the technology advancements on the cloud. Today, you can spin up clusters. You can spin up various different data stores, data repositories, relational databases in no time at all. So that provides you a lot of ability to scale out, in various different needs. So it's exciting that you're able to do that with various cloud vendors. Now, at the same time, when you're trying to do this move, there's always specific requirements related to security, related to privacy, related to various different angles, thinking about what data you want to move, what are the areas that you want to cater first, what are the various challenges and so on from all of those various perspectives. So what we have seen with PKWARE a lot with our customers is that whatever data repositories they want to move, for example, as you see over here, relational databases or file shares, when they want to move into the cloud, now they need to have some sort of understanding of what they're trying to move to the cloud, because that's that visibility is the key to be able to solve a lot of these challenges downstream. When you're trying to sort of move various different departments' data, the first thing you need to know is whether what do we have, what sort of data do we have, and so on. What sort of regulation would apply to these sort of sets of data that we are trying to move to the cloud. So it's not just switching the servers off on-prem and starting servers or relational databases in the cloud. There's a lot more understanding that needs to happen before you move to the cloud, before you take that move. That's what we have seen a lot with our interaction with customers who are trying to adopt cloud and move data sets over there. But also, at this point, I want to bring in Alex as well from his experience. So what are some of the key challenges, Alex, that you have seen with this cloud migration, first of all, right off the bat?
Well, right off the bat, I think one of the first things that we need to consider is whether you should move or not move to the cloud, right? There's many advantages towards moving to the cloud. And one of the premises that we try to live on is, what are the efficiencies that you're going to gain by moving your data to the cloud, right? What are the security considerations? What are the regulatory considerations as it relates to how that data is going to now be protected, right? Are we in a position to support the business needs while still going to the cloud as well? If we are not in a position to be able to do that, it could be challenging, right? Because then the challenge that you face is whether the efficiencies that you're going to gain from moving to the cloud represent some additional risk to the business. And there is consideration that we need to factor in terms of, okay, what is the trade-off, right? So we always look at if you can protect your infrastructure in on-prem as opposed to going to the cloud, is the business going to make that investment that is going to be required once you go to the cloud? But there's a lot of cool features and functionality that's built into the cloud. Challenges that you're going to face is once you now do that, now you've created a new access point, right, for individuals to be able to try to compromise data. And what are the things that we want to factor in and make sure that, you know, it is being considered by the business as we make that decision to go to the cloud. And then looking at the types of data, right? What are the types of data that we need to be able to look at as you move to the cloud? Is it sensitive information? Is it CRM type of data? And what would be the compromise should that data, you know, what is the challenge should that data get compromised? You got to be able to factor those in as part of the whole analysis before you move to the cloud.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that, Alex. So if you'd move to the next slide, please. So let's talk about some of those key challenges one by one, Alex. And I think we've talked about this in between our discussions with one-on-one as well. What types of data organizations should consider before migration. So tell me about this as well, and I'm going to tell you what I see a lot. Is there a difference between sort of understanding various types of data, whether it's PII, PCI DSS, and others, and how companies should think about this? So if I want to move data to cloud, in my relational databases, so what's sort of the good way of understanding different types of data and consider it before moving to the cloud?
So when you look at the different data types, we try to look at data that is PII versus non-PII. So let's say you're a health provider or an organization that's in a regulated industry, right? There is specific controls around how that data is processed. And there is an expectation that if you move it from the on-prem to the cloud, you still need to have controls around it, right? So at the end of the day, the way you manage on-prem and the cloud shouldn't really change, right? And I think in the marketplace today, because of the ease of being able to spin up a new bucket, spin up a container, and move that data and make it readily available, businesses are making that initial leap to get to the point of saying, hey, let's just move to the cloud without all the security configuration. So a lot of that stuff, you have to kind of work it out. But then there's also data restriction on the type of information that can be collected, right? So if you're going to spin up a new application, are you collecting biometrics information? Is that part of your application from a day-to-day basis? And there is specific control around processing and consent and how that is collected, right? So we have to kind of factor that type of information in. Are you doing relationship database? Who have access to that information? What does the processes within the cloud architecture, how is it designed to maintain the security and integrity of the data as we decide to move to the cloud, right? We definitely need to factor that in again.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. And I think from my perspective, I've seen a lot of this as well, right? Where it's whether it's PII, non-PII, health related, as you said as well, obviously other sensitive data. Now, a lot of times when you want to move to the cloud, the distinction between these is the key, right? Is the key to know where you want to move, to which territory, to which cloud vendors, right? And also what sort of laws would apply, because and we've talked about this, Alex, as well, that different regulatory requirements would need some data to be in specific country, for example, be accessed by specific people and so on. So I think that understanding what types of data you have, and whether that's PII and non-PII is the key to getting that sorted. getting that first step sorted, and then based on that, then you can build on.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you look at some of the regulatory oversight that's working towards managing data, right? I think one of the challenges you see, the importance of data, it continue to grow. I think there was through like automation, AI, there's a lot of processes being investment being made into understanding better outcomes. So you have large organization that's been maintaining data for 50 years or 50 plus years or 100 years, and it has just remained in relationship databases, structured and unstructured infrastructure. And one of the things that we are seeing is that there's a big approach towards getting better outcome, finding out what kind of an additional processing that we can do from that data, right? So if you don't have the infrastructure on-prem, moving to the cloud may provide some benefits in terms of your ability to process that data much faster. But then once you start looking at that approach, the whole issue on processing and purpose-driven and access consent in terms of the data. Because a customer may come to you, provide the data for a specific purpose. The challenge now become, hey, I just developed a new tool. Can I repurpose that data that was initially given? In some geos, there's specific consideration about what you can do and not do on the process around getting consent for that data specifically. And the challenge is that how is that going to change as you move to an environment, a cloud architecture, whereby there's consideration for data residency laws, right? To make sure that the data is processed in a specific location, or there's localization, and a lot of that stuff that is built in. Some of it is regulatory stuff at the country level that may say data from my citizens specifically need to stay within this geo. You can set up a data center anywhere as long as it is in my country, as long as I have access to that specific information sometime as well. So that's some of the conversation that you need to kind of look into. And then when you want to look at the different choices, some individuals may move to a cloud, and you can do a full cloud in terms of moving your entire architecture through the cloud. You can think of like Salesforce and other kind of environment that is majority cloud-based, or you can look at enjoying some benefits from partially moving to the cloud, right? So you as an organization may say, hey, I want to spin up a new platform and I want to be able to test my whole infrastructure. The cloud vendor may say, okay, I'm going to give you a PaaS where I'm going to give you the whole PaaS or infrastructure and let you set it up. You manage everything. I'm just going to manage the hardware, networking, and make sure that it is actually there for you. And that is kind of different compared to the our initial foray into what we call cloud, right? Was co-locations, where you may go to a site, a vendor may provide the hardware, networking, and protection for the facilities itself, and then you come in the server, you spin up your application, and everything is maintained. Those initial co-lo differs from the cloud providers that we have today, because now you have somewhat more functionality to be able to spin up application and do that right in the same set, right? And that's where companies are trying to benefit from that whole process to kind of move to the cloud. But then there's still consideration around responsibilities. As a business, your responsibility technically does not change because you move to the cloud. That risk cannot be just transferred to the cloud provider, right? You as a business is still ultimately responsible unless the cloud provider is more or less processing data, right? So you become like a joint processor around that process. But the ownership of that data still rests with the customer. So there's a whole consideration in terms of how do we make sure that there's process in place within the application and architecture to kind of do role-based access control and some kind of other things that kind of dictate that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I've also seen stuff similar to that, by the way, Alex. And the cloud offering that you're talking about. So I was discussing with a customer, a large financial customer worldwide, and what they're trying to do and what their motivation was to move to the cloud was that they were having on-premises racks of database systems, one of the big database systems. And there was a lot of licensing fee that they were paying for this. There were a lot of resources that they were trying to get this right and make it go running properly. So the motivation for them to move to the cloud, like a PaaS service of a relational database in the cloud, was a big one. So they couldn't ignore that. But where they started was that they started with test dev scenarios, not production setups. So they started over there, and they said, hey, we are going to, so the ROI is huge. We're going to be moving a lot of data to the cloud, test dev into the cloud, and we're going to save our licensing cost and resources cost. So it's a huge benefit for the organization. But at the same time, we need to get the buy-in from compliance. We need to get the buy-in from security. We have laws in every country. We're a huge company, worldwide. So every country, laws and regulations affect us. So that sort of dynamic is there, obviously, with our customers that I see, while trying to get these PaaS services, SaaS services, and so on, a huge benefit. But that play of whether the security and compliance is taken care of. And also, to come into your earlier other point as well of the shared responsibility. This is a huge one, right? Because whichever cloud vendor you choose, you still have, and perhaps a lot of people not understand this, but you still have the responsibility of that data. You're the data controller of that data. You're the data owner of that data. That data is for your business purposes, not for that cloud vendor's business purposes. So there is that shared responsibility, as you pointed out as well. And I see that with my customers as well. And it needs to be addressed. It needs to be taken care of. That, hey, if we are moving something from on-premises with all these security controls and firewalls and stuff to the cloud, it's the same sort of setup, as you said, same sort of security applies, same sort of privacy applies, same sort of requirement applies. So I think I totally agree on that. I think we have seen that as well.
Yeah, you definitely have to look at that. I think so. Like one of the major benefits of being able to easily spin off a cloud service, right? It's not only just financial. So in a traditional architecture where a lot of that stuff was on-prem, it would cost money. You'd have to go to the CFO and say, okay, I need to just buy a whole rack with all of this infrastructure, and it's just for testing for a short period, right? So the benefit of a cloud is that you can easily spin that up, move your data in, test it, and then spin it back down. So you're only really responsible for the cost during the time it's operational. And when you look at total utilization within the data center, a majority of application runs anywhere around 20 to 30%. And they may have some peak time, right? So when you're going to build out a full architecture to be able to do like a dev, production, and testing, that costs money. And you may only need testing for a specific period of time. So that's what some of the offering that the cloud vendor brings. The only challenge is like everything else. As opposed to just being responsible for the security to your network and your architecture within your data center, now you're just moving it to the cloud, right? And now you move it to the cloud, and if there's not proper consideration around privacy by design and proper access control within that architecture, that infrastructure that you're spinning up to get that benefit easily becomes a headache, right? Because some researcher, somebody's going to go and find that you didn't check one box that you needed to lock the container or do specific things within that process. And, it becomes, you really have to look at it and sit down and look at the differences in the architecture being provided to you as a business, the purpose for which you want to move to the cloud or not, and whether you want to do like a shared model, whether you want to go full cloud, whether you want to do part cloud, or whether you want to go someplace kind of in between, right? Where you may have some type of your application that's cloud-based, and the other ones that more, as they say, your secret sauce, you may keep it closer to your chest.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yes, I can absolutely resonate to some of those stories. Absolutely. Now, excuse me. So one more thing that comes to my mind, Alex, on this is that you talked about shared responsibility and so on. So how do you, because this comes a lot with discussions with customers. So how do you differentiate between data processor and data controller. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, when we start looking at who's a processor, right? What is the purpose for which the data is being processed and who controls that responsibility? As the business, you remain responsible for that, to be able to try to distinguish, okay, what is the purpose for which this data is being processed? Then the whole process around minimization, right? Only collecting what you need and processing it for the purpose for which it is collected. And then when you start looking at from a controller perspective, okay, how is that, what determines the processing of that data, right? What is the responsibility? In between those two, you end up having agreements that determine how the data is going to be processed. And you got to be able to manage that expectation so that whenever regulatory oversight comes back to you, the concern is, okay, who's responsible? Is it the one who's managing the infrastructure or the one who's setting it up? When you look at some of the service level agreements for these providers, it's going to explicitly indicate what they're responsible for and what is the company's responsibility and what is their responsibility. So those things are already outlined through service level agreements with you as a customer and the provider itself. And you got to be able to distinguish those responsibilities. You're not going to just say, hey, my cloud responsible is responsible for it. I drop all my data there. It doesn't go like that.
No, fair point. And I'll tell you about a discussion that I was having on one of the panels as well. I think one thing that comes through as well from a question as an end user, as a user of the cloud, is that, hey, I'm having to deal with some sort of GDPR regulation or some sort of regulation that warrants that I provide data back to the data subject within 30 days. Now, yes. This is actually processed by another cloud vendor, and how do I ensure that I meet all those contractual or legal sort of requirements? So my take on that was that, hey, you got to have the same sort of legal wording, legal requirement put in within your contracts with the cloud vendor as well, so that you can take that forward. When you get that request, you have that request forwarded exactly as it is, and be able to implement that and get the data out for that data subject, because that's a legal requirement. You can't go without replying to that data subject. So any thoughts?
No, you definitely can't. So and that goes back to the question that we had at the top, right? So the question is, as an organization, when you are on-prem, you have to know where your data is located, right? So I think the IOC has different templates and processes that talk about how do you identify where your data exists. Because I think in reference to your data subject access request is the one that you mentioned before. As an organization, you're still responsible for being able to reply to that customer request within that designated time. So if a D-star request come in, and you can come in many formats, whether it's an email, a phone, a text, or not, however the process is that the request can come in from the customer, you need to have a solution in place to be able to run that through a process. And if you just spin up your cloud everywhere and don't really know, okay, what information is on-prem, what information is within the cloud, you still need to provide that information back to the customer, right? And that is just the initial request that a customer can ask. If a customer indicate that they want you to stop processing their data, do you have a process in place to not only just identify where the data is, but to be able to go and say, okay, I'm going to stop processing the data as the request comes in, or they ask you to erase that data, right? And now that goes back to the whole data regulation around where you're operating, right? Within the US, there may be some requirement where a customer can submit a request like that. But if you're because we lack federal oversight at the US level, it's not the same like if you're in Europe. So those kind of requests have, it's more fundamental rights within the EU compared to what we have in the US. We have a few states that have gone down that approach, but the right to erasure and all of those things are still not as mature in terms of the expectation at the business level within the US, while it more fundamental rights within EU and other designation around the world. And that provides businesses with the option to say, hey, how am I going to be in a process? What infrastructure am I going to set up for me to be able to identify the sources? Who am I sharing data with? How is it being processed? How is it being collected? And I can say, okay, it's in my endpoints, it's in my infrastructure, and I have it in the cloud. So I can submit that request and I can go and search that when these are requests coming from a customer. So while we move to the cloud, our regulatory responsibility doesn't really change, right? We have to stay on point and still being able to get to that data and take action according to whatever the requirement come from the customer. Then you have the whole issue of transferring, right? Yeah. How do we limit data, not only in the location, and how do we set up the architecture that addresses some of those requirements? Okay,
yeah, fair enough, fair points.
Sure.
Appreciate that. So, just one last point before we move to the next slide is that, yeah, I mean, Europe has, and especially, the entire EU almost has worked on GDPR and, all of these regulations, which provide actually more rights in the way to be able to address, when you get that from data subjects point of view, a request of access, a request for their data, you need to be able to do it effectively within a month, within a month's time. So, yeah, I mean, knowing where that data exists, what type of data it is, yes, that's the key to be able to address that requirement. Having that in the contracts to be able to implement that's also the key. So, can we move on, please, to the next slide? So, maybe talk about the different type of other challenges that we have. So, consideration of data residency and cross-border transfers. This is also a very hot topic, especially because of Schrems and so on. So, what is your take, first of all, Alex, on this one?
Well, I think like I said before, because data is now becoming so valuable, right? And when you consider the fact that purpose-driven approach in terms of how data is processed is where most organization is going to. And when you look at not every country have I wouldn't say a mature infrastructure, but when the thing comes around data, but it's a whole understanding, okay, what is that value? So maybe within the US, data is valuable as a commodity in the sense that a business can spin around that data and collect it from you, throw our policies together, and then I can share it with another company and they start using your data, right? So when you look at some of the regulation that is in place now and the whole process of how do you manage that cross-border flow, the concern around that situation is with the data residency, they're like, okay, the data need to stay here, you need to process here and manage the process within the geographic location. When you look at the ability to transfer or not transfer, the challenge that you have there is when the data is transferred from one region to the next region, is the level of protection for the customer equal, right? In terms of what you can do or not do with the data itself. So there was a perception, and obviously for national security reason and other things, there's been a lot of conversation and stuff written around what can happen or not happen if the data is transferred to some region of the world, where the whole issue around adequacy, right? So there's a concept of adequacy where the EU, for example, may establish that the country have a level of adequacy as it relates to data protection rights for citizens and how that information can be considered. And there's a process that you're trying to indicate, okay, the same level of protection for my individual or citizen with data may be the same if it's transferred to the next location, right? So there's processes that kind of manages that. And I think before we had an agreement in place, right, that shields some organizations' ability to be able to do cross-border, at least from a US and a EU, through the Privacy Shield and some of the other arrangement before. And obviously that was invalidated recently as it relates to what can happen and not happen in those cases.
Yeah. It's always a difficult one, right? Because and I think we were discussing this as well, Alex, that you could be an American company with European customers, with data centers in China or India and so on. Then you're in all sorts of legal requirements, and I think to be able to understand what legal requirements come through to you as an organization? What are the key things that you should be careful about? What regulations, and then where the data is, what sort of data, and then where that data is. I think that's also the key to getting some of this solved properly.
And that's where that jurisdictional and data sovereignty implication comes into play, right? Because there's always the challenge around which jurisdiction will have oversight should a challenge come, right? Typically, it's where the data is located, where it's processed, and a lot of that stuff as well. So if you have a data center, you can be a multi-jurisdictional organization that's trying to process data along that space. And where you may run into challenges is the whole idea, okay, my data center is now located in the US. So now US professionals and other people have access to that data, but the data that's within that architecture is now European data, right? And there's specific regulations governing how EU data is located, regardless of where it is, right? So those control doesn't really change because it's in the US, right? Or other parts of the world. There's specific consideration around how we need to manage that. And then when you look at the whole jurisdictional stuff becomes, okay, does federal responsibility trumps your right to protection, right? Because there's a lot of conversation within that space around, hey, some organizations having access to the data because you're a US company, right? Or in China, there may be specific regulations around the government needing to have access or the ability to see that information. Yes. And as an organization, based on where you operate, you have to be governed by the rules within the sovereignty of that area of the world from which you operate as well. And that doesn't change because you go into the cloud, right?
Yes, true. It stays as it is. Your responsibility probably increases.
Yes, definitely. It's going to increase because now, just like any contract, right? When you're going to do a contract, they would typically say that within the specific region, any challenges will be governed and occur here, right? Yeah. What if you're not a citizen of that region? Is there a specific consideration that you want to be able to look at?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. The next point is an interesting one, right? Because this can be security of the data, can be many things, and I know you have worked on this more than I, but I also have worked on this for last 12 years, and for various different reasons. In the past, I've worked with customers to be able to find PCI DSS data and address those sort of requirements. A lot of this starts with the understanding of the data. I mean, the security and privacy. At the end, all of this, in my understanding, we're working with large companies worldwide, is all of this is perhaps 3 or 4 key things. That is finding the sensitive data, as in knowing what you have in your organization, all of the different types of data, right? Structured, unstructured, semi-structured, and also the classification of all of this, right? Whether this is PII, PCI DSS, GDPR, health-related, HIPAA-related with customers in US, and so on. So that classification is also the key. But then there is all these different things that you can do to the data once you understand this data, right? Things like, sanitization of this data, ensuring the compliance with applying anonymization, pseudonymization sort of things, right, Alex?
Yeah.
Isolation and so on. So there are various ways in which you can sort of apply these security controls and be able to sort of answer those key questions, those major questions. Because I remember from PCI DSS days, right? The data, there was PCI DSS data, and if you take sort of like a small copy of that data, but then you encrypt it, or you mask it, or you obfuscate it, now it's not, unless you have a reason to go, a way to go back to the actual data, it's effectively a data that it's not part of PCI scope, right?
Well, well, you remember, that's something you need to be mindful of, right? So I think there is a lot of conversation and research in the market today that look at the whole process of anonymization. And you're always going to hear, whether you look at it from a resource perspective or practical perspective, if any data that is truly anonymized it's not usable, right?
It's not usable.
What companies like to do, they may say, okay, I'm going to remove a subset of identifiable data within that data set, but I'm going to keep some waste still. And if it's truly anonymized, you really can't use the data.
Exactly.
So like in previous places where I've worked, I've had questions like that, right? Where we wanted to look at healthcare data across a specific spectrum, and the research request was like, yeah, I could remove all the PII, right? And then I can still use the data. And I'm like, you realize that what is considered personal data, the scope has really changed. Because if there is anything that is left that may be able to identify it back to Ali, it is personal data, right? So that's not going to take you out of scope just because you go through process around anonymization. And even if you go through encryption, that's more of a security control. But if there's a way to break that encryption and get access to the data, you're still exposing the risk there. Like, we had one of the questions that come in to talk about, what type of data should absolutely not move to the cloud. The answer to that would be any data that you can't really protect, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. I think some of the categories of data you may try to be hesitant is more sensitive data, right? Health records, some financial stuff, information around kids, right? Specifically, you would want to not only decide not to move, but make sure that the controls in place is heightened for that type of data, right? Because GDPR and other type of regulation consider those sensitive data, religious, ethnic, and kind of other things that you would want to do. But if you start with the whole process of data minimization, where you start looking at only collecting what you need and only keeping the data for as long as you actually need to keep that data, that kind of help you as a business. While as you put a structure in place and the security around protecting the data, the whole idea of don't collecting more than what you need. Like you may fill out a form, and they may ask you for your full ID, right? Like Social Security or other type of numbers across the globe that represent a unique number for you. And the question was, do you need to collect that data? Is it required as part of the application of being able to provide service, right? So if you don't need to collect the data, first start by not collecting that type of data, not just to say, hey, I'll collect it today, and then maybe we'll use it later, right? Because a lot of businesses try to take that approach now where they collect so much more data on you, but they may not use it today. But they're looking at it in terms of, okay, as technology changes later, there may be an opportunity to get better outcome. We're seeing that in the healthcare space right now that is occurring. Because imagine a hospital in the region, they have multiple decades of information about you, your parents, if you stayed within a small space. Imagine a researcher being able to get access to that data to analyze outcome for specific type of individuals, male, female, different ethnicities over a period of time, right? When you come as a patient to get care, the expectation is not they're going to just give that information to researchers. A lot of organizations try to cover it by putting it in the policy that is going to be needed for other types of purposes, but it's still not what the intent of the customer is not the same, right? So as a lot of that process is going, I think you've seen a lot of that in the marketplace today. There is also a lot of use cases where we've seen coming out where the intended purpose of the data is now being challenged, where you may go online, you may post a picture, you may do different things on social media, all of a sudden somebody starts scraping those images, right? And there was a recent use case where an organization tried to do like a First Amendment right to access your information because, it was publicly available information. Yes, it was, but the intended purpose for which it was produced was not what is being used now. And they were trying to legally argue that, hey, there was a process in place for us to do it because you put it online, right? So.
No, I appreciate that. I think, one thing that I'd add to your, good points is that this security of the data, especially that anonymization piece that we talked about, and I think, a lot of this comes down to some of the key things that, in my discussions with customers as well. So, for example, how do I know anonymization versus pseudonymization? Although GDPR gives a definition of this, by the way, Alex, the anonymization versus pseudonymization. But think of it like this: that there are 40 people from a specific postcode in London, and you want to do some sort of pseudonymization, trying to remove some trends and so on. But then this set has names, but also some sort of diseases written next to the names. So, for example, 2 people out of those might, unfortunately have cancer or something. Even if you anonymize or remove everything from the names, you still can find out who are these 2 people and get that understanding. And that's what GDPR also says, that a real anonymization is very hard. As you rightly said, it's an extremely hard thing to do. It's an extremely hard thing to achieve. You can do pseudonymization, and pseudonymization has its definition as well, which I wouldn't get into. Not to bore the audience, but you'd always end up data having some sort of a high level of pseudonymization, which is closer to anonymization, but not completely 100% anonymized. Because 100% anonymized means you have removed all the usefulness of the data, right, Alex? I mean, why you're keeping the data? Coming back to your earlier concept that you talked about, the data minimization as well. You sort of have a legal reason or some valid business requirement why you're keeping this data. So you can only do so much, and pseudonymize the data. Real anonymization is very hard. And if you do real anonymization 100%, then that means that data is not useful anymore. All the trends will go away.
It's always going to be the same like that, right? Because I think there was some research that I think Dr. Sweeney out of Harvard had did a couple of years ago that looked at the ability to identify close to 90% of the US population using like 3 or 4 biometric markers, maybe a zip code and other things like that. And it's the same thing that goes back to your point. One of the things that you have to look at when data is being processed and for purpose-driven collection today, when you think of the role of data brokers, right? There is individual who's collecting information on you for which you have no legal business purposes or relationship with them.
Yeah.
And while that one person may be able to say, oh yeah, I can try to take it to an anonymization process. And if they leave enough of a marker, you can take it to one of these big data brokers, and in no time, they can identify that this is Ali who live at this postal code within the UK, right? Yeah. So that's where the whole process in terms of why even in the US, there's a big fight now around getting something at a federal level. Because of our structure right now, federal rules obviously overstep some of the control that would be put in place at the state level, right? Mm-hmm. So my biggest fear long-term is a lot of the same providers within the space, as they consider to influence what may occur at the federal level, may eventually get like a softer, national privacy regulation, right? That may trump some of the stuff that you have at the state level. And I think it is incumbent for us as a customer to really kind of look at, hey, how is my data really being used?
Yeah.
There was not a lot of awareness in terms of the fact that there's certain regulation that's put in place, and customers need to better understand their legal right and to be able to request information from customers. But even in the US, some of the folks that do a lot of major collection is excluded, right, for whatever purposes around that process. So we got to get better informed in terms of how customer is using, and some of the research that I did as part of my doctoral program specifically look at that, right? How do we influence decisions? How does knowledge of regulatory experience or regulation within a specific location impacts those decision disclosure, right? So customers today, there is this risk versus reward approach. Yep. Folks might say, hey, I'm not going to give my data, but if you give $5 coupon off, that kind of shattered that, hey, I'm not going to share my information. But you really have to look at businesses, right, and consider how data is being used. And that affects businesses as well. As you try to move to the cloud, one of the things that we're trying to look at is trying to avoid that click next syndrome is what I call it, where an individual may not consider security challenges on-prem, but everything is so easy in the cloud that they think you just got to click next to configure it. So not really having that underlying security practice or best practices or experience, you think, yeah, I can spin it up and in 2 days it is there. And that's where you have a lot of access control challenges, where individuals or organizations are not mindful about some of the best security best practices because we're trying to move so fast, right, to put the data there. But they're missing those principles that you would do when it's on-prem, the role-based access control, identifying a specific access to data for the function, right? So what is your responsibility? And being able to set up profiles. The cloud providers give you a lot of that access now. And I think as businesses today, there is this focus on trying to prevent individuals from outside of your organization from actually penetrating your infrastructure, right, from a security. But as a researcher and somebody who comes from that specific field, from my perspective, I look at it whereby the individual with the most access represent the most risk. And as you migrate to that cloud, you have to have process in place to make sure that, hey, somebody's not going to just download all your information without being able to identify the event occurring, being able to respond to the event itself, be able to meet compliance, regulations, audit. All those things can be integrated within the cloud architecture today, but businesses just need to take the time to fully understand what is the scope, what is available within each subset of the cloud architecture, and then minimize that exposure.
Thank you for that, Alex. That's very useful. I hope the audience finds this useful as well. So if you just go to the next slide, please. And yeah, all right, thank you. So, what Alex and I have talked about, I think that brings me to this slide, specifically around PKWARE, how PKWARE can address a lot of these requirements that we talked about. And as you see over here, and as we've discussed, a lot of this goes to finding sensitive data, and that's what you see in the first box. This is a natural right step to do before doing all of this work that you need to do in order to ensure that you're doing the right things for moving to the cloud. So first is detection, discovery, and classification of sensitive data. That PKWARE can help you do wherever your data is today on premises, or even if it is some of it is already in the cloud, PKWARE can find that data, classify that data for you. And then on top of that, then there is a offering from PKWARE to do protection as well. Some of the things that I and Alex talked about in order to do anonymization, pseudonymization, encryption, obfuscation of the data. So PKWARE has strong capabilities in this area as well to perform anonymizations. There's up to 30 to 40 different techniques in order to sort of address specific requirements while ensuring that you can maintain the usefulness of the data. That's the key. Alex and I think we're talking about this as well. Why you're keeping the data, because it has very useful trends and analytics that you can get from it. Its value is there, but at the same time, because of regulations and security, you need to be able to anonymize some part of it. Maybe the unique identifiers, you need to remove that. So this is where PKWARE can help you as well. Really strong offering over there. Then we have the functionality, the module that addresses privacy controls specifically as well. And this goes back to our earlier discussion regarding GDPR, the DSAR request automation. So if you get a DSAR request from a data subject, so what actually happens behind the scene? Do you scramble at that time, write some scripts manually, right? So that takes a lot of there's a lot of headache that needs a lot of processing in the back end, because your data is in various different database systems. How do you know which ones to touch, which ones to scan the data from, and so on. So here you have the the ability to do request automation, the DSAR request automation, in two ways, in right of access and right to erasure as well. So that's really a key thing that should be able to address that specific requirement, where a data subject comes in and they say that, hey, my name is Ali Kazmi, and I've been your customer for 5 years. Now where is my data? And if you have my data, just go ahead and remove it as well. So those are the key things. You need to be able to answer those. And from PKWARE perspective, it's a strong tool that can offer this automation of all these rights specifically for you. Now, in addition, within privacy, there are interesting things like inventory identities and users and system. This again goes back to our discussion because, from the perspective of a privacy officer or security officer, you need to be able to understand various data subjects' data, which locations it is stored on, which locations it's stored in, who's touching this data, and all of those nice things. That's what PKWARE provides over here as well. In the dashboard, you would be able to see these things, and understand where this different data is and where the data is being accessed from, which countries, and do these sort of like delta of various things that, hey, a German citizen's data where is it being accessed from? Is it being accessed by only people within Germany? Is it being stored on the servers only in Germany? So these sort of things is where PKWARE can help you as well. And finally, within the privacy, and I think I would personally feel that it's not only in privacy, you need it in the broader level as well from security perspective, the retention period. I think I and Alex talked about this a little bit in data minimization concept. I think you need to be able to do that, to have that understanding of data retention, because that helps you understand if something has gone over its retention period. Now is the right time to minimize that data, remove that risk from your repositories. So that insights as well, PKWARE can provide you. So I think that really helps address some of the very key requirements that you may have when you're trying to move to the cloud, when you're trying to see, which are the areas that we can move, perform then anonymization using PKWARE, and then move those first to the cloud. Get that feel of the cloud if you're not there yet. Get that test dev scenarios put in the cloud, and then if you're comfortable and you see that everything is working properly, you can address the requirements. Then you can move on to the other areas as well. I'm going to talk about two use cases. If you just go to the next slide, please. PKWARE has addressed a lot of these use cases, but two key customer use cases that I want to bring to your notice over here is a large pharmaceutical customer. They were trying to move their data to the cloud, various different files. In fact, these were unstructured files that they're trying to move to the cloud, to cloud store, and leveraging that cloud power instead of spinning up servers on-prem all the time. So what they did with PKWARE is that they created sort of a staging area where these files would land, and we look at those files. We, along with antivirus and some data profiling software, would look at these files, see what the various things are, various risks are, and so on, and then move to the safe zone, creating that safe pockets of data within the cloud store. So that's a use case that PKWARE has addressed. If you'd move on to the second slide, and I promise this is the last slide. After this, we'll take some more questions. So if you'd move on to the next slide, please. Right. So this is an interesting one. My favorite. It's an IoT devices use case that PKWARE has helped in, and it goes into exact details that I and Alex was talking about. The usefulness of the data. This is because these devices that you see on the left side were IoT and sleep apnea devices. Imagine how much sensitive data these sleep apnea devices have. They have health data. They have a lot of other data that could be used to identify this data subject. So what the customer was trying to do, this device manufacturer was trying to do, is to understand the analytics on this data, right? Because there's a lot of useful analytics in that data from the patients who are using these sleep apnea devices. But at the same time, they wanted to make sure that they are addressing the regulations, they are addressing the security of it. So what they did with us is to create a landing zone where these devices were sending some of their data, right? And anonymize that data, sort of pseudonymize would be the right word, pseudonymize that data, and then move it forward to a safe zone so they can do analytics, they can do interesting data science projects with that data. But but it was pseudonymized data. It was not able to connect back to the data subject. So this was an interesting one. We're really happy that we could address this requirement for this customer. Another cloud storage story. Really exciting things that we have worked with all these customers. I just want to leave it on this note over here that for all the audience that are there, PKWARE can help you address some of these key requirements. Please get in touch with us wherever you are in the globe, wherever you're listening in the globe. And if you have any questions right now, even please drop your questions now, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. And even later on, if you want to get in touch with us, please feel free to do that. We'll be happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, Ali, I think one of the questions that came in was around data breach warranty or data warranty or insurance, right?
Right.
Same with on-prem. So there is a perception that by getting the warranties or cyber insurance is going to protect you in the event that there was a breach. But one of the considerations that we have to tackle is that when you have an incident, those same people would actually come in and test your maturity, right, of your infrastructure, your security, and make sure that you're doing what you're saying you're supposed to do at the end of the day. Yeah. They're not just going to come and say, hey, I'm going to give you $1 million coverage, and all of a sudden an incident occurred today, and they're just going to write you a check, right? They're not going to do that, right? You need to make sure that your level of maturity for that infrastructure is actually in place at the end of the day to make sure that you're doing what you say you need to do. So there's no way of getting around taking the appropriate step to make sure that information is protected even before you have a breach. And there's specific requirement around breach in terms of who do you have to notify when certain types of breach occur. And just like GDPR, that may have a regulatory requirement around data privacy, some of the breach notification law differs across different geos that may determine, hey, who you need to notify. If you're in a place like the US, there may be specific state regulation that dictate you need to notify certain organization at the state level within 72 hours, for example, when an incident occurs. Here perhaps specific requirement around how many records need to be able to be exposed before you need to notify customers, and be able to reach out to some of those organizations to determine specifically, hey, what are their ramifications? Who do you need to confirm? And even when OGC or any kind of offers of civil rights that govern the HIPAA area come in, they're going to do the same check, right? They're going to validate that you had those things in place before an event, and then that affects corrective actions as well.
Exactly. Now, the very good points. I mean, excellent points. I mean, data warranty doesn't mean that you're not, it's all fine and you can just rest at ease. That's not the case. You've got to be able to do all the right things, and ensure that you do all the right things before doing anything with the data warranty.
And then I think Gurjit had a question where he's asking about different type of data elements, right? And what do you need to do before you transfer that infrastructure to the cloud? Yeah. I think before you transfer any type of data to the cloud, I think your consideration need to be able to looking at data typing. What type of data, what is the sensitivity of the data? Yeah. You need to be able to look at whether there's any regulatory responsibility for you as a business that you need to have before you move that data. And then before you move the data to the cloud, you need to be able to go back and look at, okay, within the cloud architecture, what control exists? How can I do role-based access control? How can I go through the process of assigning specific roles and compliance and audit around specifying that data, right? And I think his question was around payment data. So I think you talk about it before when you look at PCI DSS information.
Yes.
When you look at protecting that data, the oversight or the standards specifically look at any data that's as part of that transaction, any place where it actually requests, any place where the data rests. What is the requirement in terms of being able to access that data. How do you control access to that data, whether you're on-prem or in the cloud for your architecture from a PCI? They have governing principle that speaks to that. All the infrastructure that connects to that area also have to be protected as well, not just the area that have their credit card processing. So if you look at your terminals and all those things, you need to factor that in. That's why you need to sit down and really consider, hey, what is it that I need to do to protect the data itself, but also the infrastructure? Because you can put the protection for the data, but if the infrastructure is wide open, and then somebody who have some skills can get access to the data, they can bypass some of the controls that you may have put onto the data as well.
Yes. Thank you, Alex. I think it was really useful. There were a lot of insights even for me. So appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time as well. And thank you for the audience for their time. If they have any questions that we haven't answered, please feel free to get in touch with us. And thank you from my side. Back to you, Charlie. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, you've essentially done everything that I was going to say anyway. But thank you so much to Ali and Alexis. Very great discussion there. I just want to thank our audience as well for joining us and sending in your questions and comments. And apologies we didn't get through to answering all of those. Just a final quick reminder, if you're wondering, the webinar will be made available on demand and will be put on the website, and details will be sent to you via email. So on behalf of Data Protection World Forum and our panel, is thank you and goodbye from us.
Thank you, folks.